Out of 380 men, only 18 came back alive. 4 minutes. That was the average life expectancy of a flamethrower operator on Iwo Jima. 4 minutes in which every breath could be the last. 70 pounds of burning hell on the back, a range of barely 30 yards. And an entire enemy force aiming at that one soldier. Why would anyone volunteer for such a mission? And how could anyone possibly make it out alive? When people talk about the Pacific War, names like Guadalcanal or Okinawa are often mentioned.
This is the best supplied Japanese Army unit that the Americans have encountered in the Pacific War.
But Iwo Jima was an entirely different chapter. The island is barely 8 square miles, just a barren chunk of volcanic rock in the middle of the Pacific, roughly halfway between the Marianas and the Japanese mainland. In 1945, this tiny speck of land carried immense strategic value. For the Americans, it was the perfect forward base. Their B-29 bombers, flying missions against the Japanese home islands, had to pass directly over Iwo Jima. From there, Japanese radar and fighter aircraft could detect and intercept every attack early. If the United States could capture the island, their forces would gain a life-saving stopover. Emergency landing fields, fighter escort bases for the bombers, and shorter, more destructive attacks on Japan itself. The Japanese High Command understood this perfectly. They expected an invasion, but not the kind the Americans had launched on other islands. After the bloody lessons of Tarawa, Saipan, and Peleliu, the Japanese had learned that above-ground defenses could not withstand the massive bombardments of the US Navy. So they chose a new and far more dangerous plan. They went underground. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi took charge of the defense. An experienced officer, he knew he could not win the battle, and probably would not survive it. His goal was to make the Americans bleed for every yard of ground, and to delay the advance toward Japan as long as possible. Every hour that Iwo Jima held out meant precious time for the homeland. American intelligence estimated no more than 13,000 defenders. In reality, nearly 23,000 Japanese soldiers waited, almost all of them deeply entrenched. Engineers had carved an 11-mile network of tunnels, bunkers, ammunition chambers, and hidden artillery positions into the soft volcanic rock. Every beach was precisely measured, every field of fire pre-sighted. There was no clear front line, only an invisible web of positions supporting one another and connected beneath the ground. On February 19, 1945, the US invasion began after days of air attacks and relentless naval shelling. When the first waves of Marines finally came ashore, the coast looked like a bombed-out wasteland, but in truth, almost nothing had been destroyed. The soldiers struggled through deep, black volcanic sand that swallowed their boots, bogged down vehicles, and made it nearly impossible to dig defensive cover. At first, there was an eerie silence. For an hour, not a single shot was fired. The Marines gathered and tried to push up the steep slopes. Then suddenly, Kuribayashi gave the signal. A storm of machine gun fire, mortars, and pinpoint artillery erupted without warning. Hundreds of Marines were cut down in tight clusters with no cover. Still, the US forces clawed forward yard by yard and slowly began to realize the deadly system that awaited them. Again and again, the Marines encountered the same lethal obstacle, the so-called pillboxes. These massive concrete bunkers were armed with machine guns, visible only through narrow firing slits, and positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire. Some were so perfectly camouflaged that troops could walk right past them without noticing, until the muzzle flashes lit up. To destroy a pillbox, attackers had to crawl under constant fire to within a few yards, find an opening, and toss in grenades or satchel charges. But many of these bunkers were built with zigzag interiors, so a single explosion rarely finished the job. Here a weapon came into play that became infamous on Iwo Jima, the flamethrower. It was one of the few tools capable of wiping out such fortifications completely, yet using it was a nightmare for anyone who carried it. The standard model for the US Marines, the M2, consisted of 2 large tanks filled with thickened fuel and a smaller cylinder of compressed nitrogen. Through a hose with an ignition device, the fuel was expelled as a blinding stream of fire. But the range was only about 20 yards, and a full tank provided barely 7 seconds of flame, spread over short, controlled bursts. To hit a target, the operator had to get within hand grenade distance of the bunker, use those few seconds of fire perfectly, and then retreat immediately. The moment the bright flame was visible, enemy fire inevitably concentrated on him. His comrades tried to cover him with machine guns and rifles, but the 70-pound device slowed him down and made him an ideal target. Being captured was considered even worse than a quick death. Because of the weapon's horrifying effects, Japanese soldiers did not treat flamethrower operators like ordinary prisoners of war. Immediate execution was often the most merciful outcome. One particularly grim report tells of a Marine whose weapon failed in front of a cave. 2 Japanese soldiers dragged him inside, and his comrades heard his screams for 2 full days, unable to intervene. The weapon was dangerous to its user as well. A sudden gust of wind or a technical malfunction could send the flames back toward the operator, and even those who survived had to live with the knowledge of what they had done. At such close range, they saw, heard, and smelled every effect of their own fire, a trauma many never escaped. To maximize its impact, Marines sometimes used a brutal technique called a wet burst. First, they sprayed the bunker with unignited fuel, then followed with a lit burst. Inside the confined space, temperatures soared above 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit as the oxygen burned away. Even those not directly hit by the flames had almost no chance of survival. But losses among flamethrower operators were so extreme that the Marines searched for a weapon with more protection and greater range. The answer came in the form of flame tanks. These were modified Sherman tanks, officially designated M4A3R3, whose main gun was replaced by a flamethrower system. From the outside, they looked like ordinary Shermans, but they could unleash fire streams more than 3 times farther than the portable units, up to nearly 100 yards. Carrying roughly 300 gallons of fuel, they could fire far longer. Even so, the moment a burst of flame shot from the turret, every enemy gun targeted the tank. Sitting inside a steel box filled with fuel while shells exploded around you was anything but reassuring. Yet these flame tanks proved decisive. They burned out tunnels, destroyed bunkers, and forced even the most heavily fortified positions to surrender. Without them, the capture of Iwo Jima would have cost far more lives. In the end, the numbers remain grim. Out of 380 flamethrower operators, only 18 survived. They were the Marines' most effective weapon, and the most hated. Their fire decided the battle, but it left scars that many of these men carried for the rest of their lives. Today, Iwo Jima stands not only as one of the bloodiest battles of World War II, but also as a moment when human beings were forced to use hell itself as a weapon. The island was taken, but the price was almost beyond imagination.